Go out and buy an Easter basket, a cheap, flimsy, mass-produced one, or you can make one yourself. It's handmade, it's personal, and it is going to be the coolest one on the block. Today, I'm giving you the measurements for this basket, and I will walk you through step by step so you can create your very own Easter basket. Get all the measurements in the description box below, and let's get started. First, let's talk about the materials we are going to need. First of all, we need one lining piece, and I am using a cotton poplin, but you could use something like a polycotton as well. Then we are going to need two main panels for the outside, and again, I am using a cotton poplin, but you could use anything like a polycotton or even a canvas, which is a heavier fabric. To give my main panels a bit of structure, I have cut out two fusible interfacing pieces, and this is Vlieseline F220, which is a lightweight interfacing. You will also need some handles. Now you can either add one handle to your bag or two handles, and for this version today I want to add two handles to my bag. To make our handles a bit sturdier, we want to also use a strip of interfacing in each of them. Cut out two pieces of interfacing if you're doing two handles, or just one handle and one piece of interfacing if you're choosing to do just one handle. To add the egg applique to the outside of our bag, you are going to need a piece of fabric which is the color of the egg that you want to add to the outside of your bag. To make application easier, you are going to need a bit of heat and seal or heat and bond, which is an interfacing that has two sides of glue, so it's double-sided, and it will just make the application of the egg easier to attach to our main panel. If you do not have heat and bond to hand, you can just use a piece of interfacing to make your egg layer a bit more sturdy, and we will just attach it to the main panel in a slightly different manner. If you want to add ruffles to the top of your bag, then you are going to need just one piece of the fabric of your choosing. Again, all the fabrics I'm using today are cotton poplins, and for the handles I'm using a canvas. So you can mix match with different types of fabrics with whatever you have to hand in your stash. So to get us started with the project, put all of your fabric to the side and let's grab a hot iron so that we could fuse our interfacing to our fabric. So let's start with one of the main panels. Grab one main fabric panel and grab a piece of corresponding interfacing. Now you will be able to feel on the interfacing, one side is a bit more rough than the other. So the side that is rough has got glue dots on it, and we want the glue dots facing the wrong side of our fabric. We align all the edges, and then when we apply the iron, make sure that you are pressing the iron down and lifting and pressing it down again for the amount of time that it's needed to apply the interfacing. Do not drag the iron across, because by doing that you will be creating little pockets of air underneath, and you will be able to see that on the outside. So press it down for a few seconds, lift it up and press another area. So one main panel is done. Let's grab the other main panel, and we're just going to repeat the same steps. For this particular interfacing that I am using, the instructions on how to apply it to the fabric is to keep the hot iron on top of it for 8 seconds and then move on to another area. So hold my iron down for 8 seconds and then I can keep on moving over. Okay, so now we have both our main panels ready. Let's prepare our handles. First, before applying the interfacing, we want to fold it long ways, wrong sides together, and we are going to press it with the hot iron so that we can create a crease over here. Now that we've created a crease, we can use that as a guide to attach our strip of interfacing. Again, just feel where the glue side is. So this is my bumpy side, and I want my bumpy side, which is with the glue, facing the wrong side of the fabric, and I'm using that center crease as a guide to align the interfacing. And once that's in place, I just press it again with the hot iron. Now, still on the handles, take one long edge of your handle and fold it so that it meets that same center crease and press it into place. Now we'll take the other raw edge and fold it to that center crease as well and press that into place. And now we're just going to fold it once more. We're going to use now that center crease as a bit of a guide and make sure that our folded edges on this side are all aligned, and give it one last press. And then we can add some clips to hold that in place. And if you are doing a second handle, you just need to repeat these same steps again. Since we have the hot iron out, and if you are adding the ruffle to the top of your basket, let's press our ruffle in half a long ways now. If you are using a fabric that has a print on it, you are going to be folding the fabric wrong sides together. So that means that the pretty side will be on the outside, and just press it in half to create a center crease. If you do not want to add the ruffle to your bag, then you can move ahead on to the next step. Now this is the exciting bit, because we are going to be drafting our own egg, and what that means is there's probably going to be no one else in the world who has got the exact same size egg that you have. So you can make a smaller egg, a bigger egg, lots of eggs. However you want to customize your basket, you can do that. For today's project, I am just going to make the one egg for one side of my basket. To create our egg applique, lay your little piece of fabric over the heat and bond so that you can cut out roughly the same size as your fabric. Just grab any pen, any marking tool, and we are going to draw on the back side. So on the paper side of our heat and bond is where we are going to draft our own egg. Now an egg is generally bigger at the bottom and smaller at the top. So I'm just going to draw something like this. So this is what I have come up with. Definitely not perfect, but it is going to be just right for my project. Grab the iron again, and we are going to use this heat and bond to the wrong side of our fabric. My fabric doesn't have a wrong side, but on your fabric, you are going to put the glue side down, paper side up, onto the wrong side of your fabric, and we are going to just press that with a hot iron. If you don't have heat and bond to hand, you can just use a piece of interfacing, the same interfacing that we used for the main panel, and you can just add that to stabilize your piece of fabric. So that is now fused in place, but the glue is still hot in between the layers, so we just have to leave it for a few minutes while it cools down before we can cut out our shape. So my egg is now cooled down enough. I'm just going to cut out my egg shape to get it ready to attach to my main panel. Okay, and there's my egg. If you want to keep this little piece to maybe cut out a few smaller eggs, you can go and do that and also add them to the side of your bigger egg. Completely up to you. Customize your project as you see fit for you. Grab one of our main panel pieces so that we can add our egg onto it. So if you are using maybe two different fabrics, one fabric for one side and another for the other side, choose the fabric where you want to get your egg onto, and let's put it into place. So because this bag is going to be a boxed bag, we can't just exactly place it anywhere because it might fall on one of the folded areas. So first, let's take our panel and fold it in half so we can finger press to create a bit of a crease in the middle. Open it up, and I have my crease just there. And because our bag is going to be a box bag, the sides are going to be folded as well as the bottom. So we want to make sure that we place our egg more towards the center and not towards one of the sides where it could potentially be folded over. So because I have my center crease here, I'm going to ignore roughly about 2 inches from the side and 2 inches from the bottom, because that's going to be the part that is folded, and I'm going to place my egg just about here. I want to make sure that the top of my egg is also not exactly on the top, because we are going to be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance there plus an 1/8 of an inch top stitch. So I want to have my egg roughly about 1 inch below the top edge and centered. Now what we want to do is press our egg in place if we used heat and bond. If you didn't use heat and bond and are using just a layer of interfacing on the back side, you don't have anything to glue it now to your main panel, so just pin it in place for now, and then we can carry on with the next step. Because we are using a heat and bond, before we can actually attach it to our main panel, what we want to do is remove the paper backing first. As I am removing the paper backing, you can see that the glue has remained on my fabric, and all I am removing is just the paper. There is my egg full of the glue on the back side, which is going to allow it to stick to my main panel now. So again, I'm just going to center my egg, and the top of the egg is just about 1 inch from the top, and we can fuse it into place. Again, we want to leave the glue to dry for a bit now before we take it over to our sewing machine, because we don't want our glue to get onto our needle and potentially just make it a bit gummy and not fit to really sew. So let's leave our glue to dry just a little bit before we move on. Now that the glue on the back of my egg has cooled down, let's head over to the sewing machine and stitch our egg to our main fabric. You can use a simple straight stitch, you can use a decorative stitch, you can use really whatever you want to in order to keep your egg secure on the main panel, but I want to create something like a satin stitch. So I'm going to be using a zigzag stitch with a 4mm width and a 0.5 stitch length. So this part doesn't have to be exactly precise, that's what adds to the uniqueness of your own basket, but I am going to be adding the edge of my egg roughly in the center of my foot, and I'm going to lower my needle into the fabric, and at this stage my needle is on top of my egg, and when it starts zigzagging it's going to be one needle on my egg, one needle on my main panel, and so on back and forth. And we are just going to follow the contour of our egg until we have stitched right around. Again, if a zigzag is not for you, you can just simply use a straight stitch, one or even two, just right around the whole egg. If you're finding it a bit tricky to keep with the sharp rounded corner at the top of your egg, then what you can do is just lift your presser foot and pivot slightly, so just move your fabric slightly. You can do this multiple times, but it's just so you can get right around that curved edge. It doesn't matter how many times you lift your presser foot to get the edge round as you want it to. So just do whatever feels right for you. Now that I've reached the beginning of the stitches where I started, I'm just going to back stitch a little bit, and then I'm going to cut my thread and my egg is attached. And this is what my egg looks like. So now my main panel is ready, but if you are attaching any more eggs, you go ahead and add as many eggs as you want to within that area that I spoke about earlier. If you are ready to continue, go ahead and grab your other main panel and let's join these together. If you are using a directional print like I am using today, make sure that you have your two tops, so the two heads of your fabric facing the same way, and you have the feet, so the bottom of the fabric the same way. We are going to align all raw edges and we are going to be clipping the sides and the bottom. I am using clips, but if you use pins, if that feels more comfortable to you, you go ahead and use that. I just prefer clips because it is less likely that I'm going to hurt myself, and if by any chance they fall on the floor, I can clearly see them, unlike with pins. Okay, we can set this aside for now. Go ahead and grab your lining piece. My lining does not have a right or a wrong side, but if your piece has a right side, make sure that you are folding it right sides together, so pretty sides together, and we are matching the top shorter edges. Go ahead and clip now two sides only, and then we will head over onto the sewing machine again. For this project, I'm using a size 90 Schmetz needle, but you can also use a size 80 universal needle. As for stitch length, you want to keep your stitch length at about a 2.4, 2.6, which is just the standard. I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I can find that measurement on my needle plate. If you don't have that measurement on your needle plate and you need a little bit more help with figuring out how to measure your seam allowance, please check my other video linked over here where it's all explained. If you have stitched your egg with a zigzag stitch, make sure now that you select a straight stitch on your machine before stitching your layers together. We are going to lower the needle into the fabric just at the top, put our presser foot down, and we are going to sew a few stitches forward and then a few stitches back to lock our stitches in place, and then continue. Once you reach one of the corners, you are going to lift your presser foot, pivot the fabric, so turn it towards the side that you want to sew down now, and then just lower the presser foot and continue sewing. And now that we are getting to the end of our row of stitches on the other side, again we want to back stitch to lock those stitches in place so that they don't unravel later on. And what we're going to do now is repeat the same thing with our lining, but we only have two sides to sew down. So I have now my lining piece sewn closed at the two sides, and my main panel with my egg interfacing, I've sewed down the two sides and as well as the bottom. Now let's create our boxed corners, and to do that we need to open up our bag and align the side seam with the bottom seam. So we need to make sure that those are matching, so they are lying right on top of each other. So do take your time just to feel where they are and pinch them in place once you have them. So I have mine lying on top of each other now, and I'm just going to flatten out this little corner and take a ruler, and you want to measure from that corner stitch along the seam. You want to measure in 1 3/4 inches and make a mark. So that's 1 inch and then 3/4. Then you want to just draw a whole line across your corner, and this is going to be the guide for your stitches. So to keep that in place, again, you can either place a couple of pins or some clips just to hold that down, and we are going to repeat exactly the same for all other 3 corners of our basket. If you did not add any applique, so any egg, to your basket, what you can do now is actually play around with the dimensions of your bag. So if you put a shorter marking for your corner, so for example 1 inch, the bottom of your bag is going to be a little thinner, but the sides will be higher. If you choose to take a larger measurement, so something like 2 or 2.5 inches, the bottom of your bag is going to be wider, so you'll have a bigger base and your sides will be a little bit shorter. So if you want to play around with your bag, now is the time to do that. Okay, so let's now grab our lining and our main basket pieces and head over to the sewing machine. Lower your needle into your fabric directly on the marking that you made across your corner, and we are going to backstitch at the beginning and at the end of our row of stitches. And this is what it looks like right now. So I've stitched directly on top of the mark. We are going to repeat the exact same steps for the other 3 corners now. Okay, now we have all 4 of our corners stitched. So to reduce bulk now in the interior of the bag, we are just going to chop off those corners and leave roughly about 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now look at this, we have our corners boxed out. If you're adding the ruffle to your bag, let's set the basket aside for now and prepare the ruffle. Earlier on, we pressed a center crease in our ruffle. We are now going to open that up and we are going to align the short raw edges. Just make sure that it is not twisted anywhere along its length, and we are going to join the short edges right sides together and place a clip here. Now let's sew these 2 short edges together using the same seam allowance we've been using, which is 1/4 inch. So now with the seam, let's press that open and we can fold it wrong sides together again. Now for us to create a ruffle on this piece, we are going to use a straight stitch, but we have to lengthen our stitch length to the longest we have on the machine. Mine is a stitch length of 5 millimeters. Now just to the front of the seam that we have there, lower your needle into the fabric and we are going to be using 3/8 of an inch seam now. So align the raw edge of your fabric with the 3/8 mark on your sewing machine and lower the needle into the fabric. And now all we're going to do is we're going to sew right around the whole length. When we reach the beginning of our stitch, we are not going to cross over it, we are going to stop just before it. Forgot to mention this a little bit earlier, but make sure that at the beginning of your row of stitches you leave 2 long lengths of bobbin as well as top thread so that you can pull them in order to create the ruffle. And we have to do the same at the end. So once again, just for you to see over here, this was the beginning of my stitches and this was the end of my stitches. I did not overlap them because if I did, I would not be able to pull on one of these long lengths of thread in order to create the ruffle. But before we start the ruffle, let's just sew another row of stitches, again with the same stitch length, so 5.0, which is just to give us that extra security and for it to be easier to pull these ruffles together. Because if we pull one of them now and the thread breaks, we are going to have to go back and sew another row of stitches. So to avoid that, let's just sew 2 rows now and it will just be easier at the end. So make sure on your sewing machine that you are pulling the previous threads out of the way, because again, if you stitch over those, it's going to be hard for you to be able to pull them to create the ruffle. So now lower your needle into your fabric at the same position where you started your other stitches, not on top of it, just at the same position, and this time we are going to be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So the second row of stitches is going to be just next to our first row of stitches. So here you can see my 2 rows of stitches and I have not overlapped them, so there's a little gap in between, and each side has 2 stitches out the front and 2 stitches on the underside as well. We are going to gather our ruffle piece to the same length as the top of our main basket. So I'm just flattening out the basket here just so that I have that available for me to measure. And what I'm going to do over here is I'm just going to take 2 threads on one side of my fabric and I'm just going to pull on them, and you can see the ruffles are being created. So as you pull, make sure that you move the ruffles down the whole length of your piece, and once you get to about halfway, then change over and start pulling from the other side. This is just that you don't have to pull from here all the way around. Like this, you are able to divide each section. So as you are pulling, just keep on measuring to see if you're about the size that you need for the top of your basket. This is probably the part of this basket where you are going to spend the most of the time, is just getting your ruffles spread out evenly. Once you are sure that you have your ruffle to the same length as the top of your basket, just go ahead and put a double or triple knot on both sides of your threads so that they don't come undone as you are adding the ruffle to your basket. If the gathers on this ruffle are not enough for you and you want even more, all you need to do is just lengthen the long rectangular strip that you cut out at the beginning. Also, if you want your ruffle to be higher, then all you need to do is also add extra width to your ruffle. This is just another point of the basket that you can customize as much as you want. What we can do now is turn the main panel right side out. We are going to align the raw edge of our ruffle with the raw edge of the top of our basket. I am just looking now here for the seam that I created in my ruffle for me to align it with one of the side seams on my basket. It's not mega important because it's going to be lost within all the ruffles. It's just something that I tend to do. I always align a seam with another seam. So if I look into my basket, I can see that the seam that I sewed earlier is facing that direction. So I want to make sure at the top, when I add my ruffle, that my seam here is also facing that direction. I don't want on top to be facing one way and at the bottom to be facing another. So I'm pushing it towards that side and I'm going to align the seam on my ruffle with that seam over there, matching the raw edges, and I'm just going to place a clip. Now continue to clip the rest of the ruffle to the top of the basket. You also want to try and get all of these loose threads out of the way so that they don't get stuck in your stitch line in a minute. Again, I'm going to look where the seam on this side is facing and I'm going to turn the top the same direction as where the bottom side is facing. So it's going that way and I'll clip it in that way as well at the top. Now that the whole ruffle is clipped onto the main panel, we can now take this over to the sewing machine and baste it in place. I am going to start stitching where the seam on our ruffle is. That's where I'm going to lower my needle into the fabric, and I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So basically we are going to be stitching on top of the last row of stitches that we created when we were doing the gathering stitches. When I am sewing gathers, I typically like to use a tweezer to help keep the gathers in place as I remove all the clips. Ruffle is now attached to the top of the bag. I'm just going to cut all of these threads off for now. And now comes the part for the handles. You can add one handle to your bag. Remember that we pressed our handles earlier on. Whether you chose one handle or two, grab them and bring them over to your sewing machine. For the handles, we had only pressed them into place earlier. So what we need to do now is secure them by sewing 2 rows of stitches down the long edges, and we are going to do that by lengthening our stitch length, because we want our stitches to look super neat on the thick layer of fabric. So lengthen your stitch length to about a 3.0, 3.5 on your sewing machine. We are going to stitch down one side first using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So align one folded edge with the 1/8 inch mark on your needle plate and lower the needle into your fabric, press a foot down and sew. Now one handle is done, and if you're doing a second handle, go ahead and top stitch down both long edges as well. Now I've top stitched down both long lengths of my handles. I am going to grab the main panel now. If you're only going to add one handle, let me show you how to do that first, but I'm going to be adding 2 handles to my bag. So on your main basket piece, you want to join the 2 seams at the side to be able to find the center of both your front and your back. What you can do is either add a little pin or just make a little snip into the fabric as a visual point, a visual reference that is the center of it. So I've made a little snip at the back, just going to make a little snip here at the front, and now I know where my center points are. Take your handle and center it over that little piece that you snipped and place a clip. Now take the handle underneath the bag over to the other side, and we are going to find the center point and clip the handle there as well. And now you can just stitch it in place within the seam allowance. So you see the stitches on your ruffle. What you want to do is stitch the handle in place on this side of your stitches. If you are going to be adding 2 handles, one to each side of the basket, we still need to find the center point like we did before if you're just adding the one handle. If you haven't done that already, let's do that now. So join these side seams, find the center of the front, and I have my mark there still from before at the front half, and at the back I still have my mark there as well. But you can either place a pin or snip a little triangle out of it. Now that we have our center mark, take a ruler and measure 2 inches to either side. Here's my center mark, and I've put the 2-inch mark on my ruler over there, and I'm going to take one side of my handle and just place it at the end of the ruler there and clip it into place. Now I'm going to take my ruler and measure 2 inches in the other direction and take the other end of my handle and just put it at the end of the ruler and clip this one in place as well. And now we are going to do those exact same measurements to attach the other handle on the other side. Another thing that I like doing once I have one side of my handles attached is I like to flatten the side seam, make sure everything is aligned at the top, just to see that if my handles match on both sides. And this one actually matches spot on. So I'm just going to do that to the other side now. So flatten this side seam, and I'm going to bring the other end of the handle and align it with what I have on the front. Okay, just about there, and I'm going to clip that into place. We have our 2 handles clipped onto the front and the back of our bag. So we are going to do exactly as I mentioned before with just the one handle. We are going to stitch the handle into place within the seam allowance here. Now we are on to the final stages of the bag. Go ahead and grab your lining piece. What you want to do is have the lining piece facing wrong side out, and we are going to put our main fabric piece inside the lining with right sides touching. Find the side seams on both your lining and your main and match those 2 together. Clip it into place. Now let's find our other side seams and align those and clip into place. Now let's clip the rest of the top of the bag in place, but we need to leave an opening so that we can actually turn the bag the right way out. So somewhere along the top, leave about a 3-inch opening. So that just means that you are going to not stitch a little part of the top, that we have a hole in it to turn the bag the right way out. If if you're anything like me and you tend to just get carried away with your projects and forget to leave an opening, I like to make a little mark either with a pen or by using pins, which is different to my normal, which I use clips, and that will just remind me that within that area I am not to put any stitches. So I'm just putting my pins in between the handles on the back side of the bag, and I'm leaving about a 3-inch opening. We are going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which is the same amount of seam allowance we used to baste our ruffle into place. So we're just going to basically sew over the same area to hide our stitches. So align the raw edge of the top of your basket with the 1/2 inch mark, and you need to put the needle in position into the fabric where you put the mark to leave an opening. So if you used a pen or a pin, lower the needle into your fabric at that point where you put your pen or pin in the fabric. The pin. You want to stitch back and forth a couple of times. When we turn the bag right side out, you are going to be putting some stress on your stitches in these places. So just back stitch a couple of times to make sure that we strengthen those stitches. Now that I have reached my other pin, again back stitch a couple of times in this area and then cut the thread. This is what you should have. You should have stitched right around the whole top and left a little opening to turn the bag the right way out. What we can do now is reach inside and just pull the fabric through. So there are just some loose threads at the top, so just go ahead and grab some scissors or some clips just to snip them all off, and then grab your iron and we are going to press the top of the bag. When you reach the part where the opening was left, make sure that you fold the raw edge of the lining inside and press that in place. All that's left now is to top stitch the whole top of the bag right around, and we are going to be closing the area that we left open while we do that. Because you need to top stitch the top of the bag, make sure that you lengthen your stitch length to a 3 or 3.5 again. We need to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the top of our fabric, but because I can't see my needle plate right now, I'm going to have to use a focal point on my foot that will allow me to keep a straight row of stitches. So I know that this little groove on my foot here is my 8-inch mark. So I'm going to align the edge of my main panel with that mark. Make sure that you just back stitch 1 stitch just in order to lock your stitches in place. Check at the bottom as well, make sure that there's no other fabric that's going to be caught in your row of top stitching that shouldn't be there. And there you have it, your very own one-of-a-kind fabric Easter basket. I hope you enjoyed sewing this fabric Easter basket with me today. If you want to follow along with more tutorials, please make sure that you subscribe to my channel. That's it from me today. Bye for now.